And our third main topic today gets submitted to us by Reptar John, who writes, "Hey, John, I was wondering what you think No Time to Die might make for the opening domestic weekend. I have looked at the seats available to purchase in a couple of different theaters around me, and I noticed that they are almost full. I'm expecting big numbers, anywhere from 85 million to 90 million. All I know for sure is that it's going to be a good weekend for the box office with Venom and No Time to Die. Thanks." All right. Thanks a lot for sending that in, Reptar. And listen, the whole idea and the projections about what James Bond No Time to Die may or may not make at the box office when it opens up here this weekend has been in flux. And I've had to personally reassess where I personally think it'll come in, because after Venom 2 came out, which we talked about the other day, after Venom 2 came out and not only destroyed the pandemic era record with opening to $90 million, it opened with more money than the original Venom did, which was not in a pandemic era. And it became the second biggest October opening in the history of cinema, only behind, Rob, The Joker, which we were just talking about. That's the only other October released movie in history that has made more money in opening weekend than Venom. And Rob, you and I discussed, it's like, well, this guy kind of makes us have to reassess what we think James Bond No Time to Die is going to do. Mm-hmm. Now, it's a long film, but I came around to saying, you know what? I'm now thinking maybe 100 million. Maybe it can be the first $100 million film. And it looks like there are some industry people that agree, because right now they're saying that No Time to Die is tracking to hit $100 million opening weekend. Now, just because it's tracking at that doesn't necessarily mean it will. It could come in at 105. It could come in at 92. I mean, whatever. But right now they're saying they're tracking is that No Time to Die hitting $100 million. Now, $100 million would be incredibly relevant for two big reasons. Big reason number one, it would break the record that's currently being held in the pandemic era of Venom 2 for a $90 million opening, which I guess then Venom 2 would break a new record for the shortest held record. Venom 2 got to hold the record for 1 week. So it's No Time to Die doing that. But Rob, here's the other thing. And this is something that I don't hear people talking about. If right now, the weekend of October 8th, 9th, 10th, whatever, if No Time to Die hits $100 million in still a pandemic recovery era, it would be not only the biggest opening since Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, it would become the number one all-time October opening in history, beating Joker. It would also become the biggest opening weekend for any Bond film in history. The current record for an opening weekend domestically for a Bond film is Skyfall, that opened at $88 million. $88 million. And that movie went on to make $1 billion. But Skyfall opened at $88 million. If No Time to Die can actually become the first film since 2019 to open to $100 million, it would be the new pandemic era record holder. It would be the biggest October opening in the history of cinema, and it would be the biggest opening for Bond ever, all in a theatrical environment that people said theaters were dead. Nobody wanted to go to the movies anymore. This would be fascinating. So the question becomes, can it? So Rob, I guess I pose these two questions to you. How significant would it be if Daniel Craig in his final outing as Bond and No Time to Die could actually hit that $100 million mark? That's number one. Number two, what do you see as the actual chances are that it could hit that numbers? How do you see that?
Well, if you look at the last two Bond openings, Skyfall opened at 88,300,000 and change. Spectre opened at 70,400,000 and change. And that was during a non-pandemic time. So the last two Bond films, one of which, Skyfall, was the biggest grossing film of all the entirety of the franchise. You know, I don't think Bond necessarily is going to hit 100 million. However, being that this is the last Daniel Craig film being that it is a pandemic and much has been made of the fact this film has been delayed, I think there's an extra added hype or marketing element to this. And I think that it's generated kind of an enthusiasm amongst movie-going audiences that this film is going to deliver something that they've been craving. I mean, it's not like we haven't been getting good stuff lately, but I do think that this film could be that movie. I think it could be the biggest grossing opening of the franchise domestically here. And I think it might make $100 million, John. I do. I think it might, but it's not a sure thing. It's the longest Bond film. You know, we'll see how many screenings they can do during the day or how many extra screens they add. But I think if any Bond movie could break 100 million, this could.
Talk for a minute about then, if it does, talk about the legacy that leaves for Bond. Like what, especially considering the current circumstances and the environment of the theatrical industry right now, in hindsight about the all-time, it would make it the biggest October opening in history, that it would be the biggest Bond. Like, talk about, if it can hit that, what does that mean? Number one, for the legacy of this film specifically, but maybe even for the legacy of Daniel Craig as Bond.
Well, you know, yesterday was James Bond Day, and it celebrated the first James Bond movie was released in 1962. Dr. No came out yesterday, but in 1962. And the fact that this franchise, this is the 25th official Bond film. It's the oldest running franchise. It has survived from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s to the 90s and deep into the aughts now, 21 years into the new millennium. And I think this is one of the most endearing and enduring franchises that exist. And I think what's really cool about the Bond franchise, John, is every generation has had their Bond. You know, and Daniel Craig's been around for 15 years. So there's been people that he's the only Bond they've ever known. Certainly the only Bond that they saw in theaters. And what I loved, like my first Bond in a theater was Spy Who Loved Me, and it was Roger Moore. And I loved Bond on TV. So Bond has become sort of an interesting pop culture icon. And I think if this movie were to come out, it's also the most expensive James Bond movie, roaring back. It really does signify that we've come through a pandemic, that people are they're willing to embrace their heroes again, go out to the movie theaters. And maybe it signifies not only that the James Bond franchise is as different as it's ever been, but also that people are coming out of this pandemic. So James Bond might not just be a hero on screen, but maybe he's a hero that, coming out of the last almost 2 years now, we can look at and maybe instead of just saving the world, he's saved all of us, John. We'll see.
And of course, I mean, I want to point one other thing out too. This is something from an article over at CNBC, and they raise a really interesting point as well. And they write this: No Time to Die is poised to do something no other major blockbuster has been able to accomplish since the coronavirus pandemic began. Top $100 million in ticket sales during its opening weekend. No Time to Die is perfectly positioned to build on Venom's momentum, said Sean Robinson, chief analyst at boxoffice.com. Currently, 2012 Skyfall holds the record for the highest grossing opening in a Bond film with $88 million in domestic ticket sales. According to data from ComScore, the movie is also the only Bond film to top $1 billion. But the interesting thing, there's the middle part there that the analyst from boxoffice.com had to say. This is going to be building on the momentum of Venom. And Rob, I kind of see that pattern, not just Venom, but when you start by looking at Free Guy, and you saw what Free Guy was able to do, and then standing on those shoulders and building on top of that was Shang-Chi, and what Shang-Chi was able to accomplish. Then we saw Venom be able to come out and build on that momentum, and then maybe rolls in this. Rob, we talked for over a year and a half now that before theaters get back to normal, we're going to have to see people starting to get introduced back to the theater again. It's going to be a slow process of getting people to come back in. But once they come back in and they have a good time and they see a movie they enjoy, say Free Guy, then okay, this next interesting one's coming out. What's that? Shang-Chi? That looks like fun. Okay. Then they come back. And then Venom comes out and they come back. And each step of the way, you gain momentum and new people coming back. And Man, I honestly didn't think that this quickly, because I've been guessing low for the box office results for the movies in October. I didn't think it would happen this quickly. But I mean, if Bond could actually hit $100 million and become the biggest October opening in history and the biggest Bond opening in history, I think that speaks a lot about that process and the momentum that they've been able to carry.
I totally agree with you. I mean, people love movies, John, and nothing can substitute going to a big theater with big sound and sitting in a crowded theater and feeling the response of the audience. That's what I'm looking forward to. I'm going to see No Time to Die on the biggest screen with the biggest sound system. It's a fan event tonight. And I don't think people had forgotten, you can stream all you want, and that's fine. But when you go see a movie on the big screen and it's presented with great projection and great sound, man, there's nothing better than that.
And on that, David McKeesey in the live chat says something very, very notable here that I was going to kind of go towards, which is on this issue of the momentum building. Could Dune be a big beneficiary of this kind of momentum? Could Dune really benefit from this? I mean, look, the reality is Dune is still facing something that Free Guy, Shang-Chi, and James Bond don't have to deal with. And that's a backstabbing studio that puts their movies out on day and date release on HBO. We saw what happened to the Suicide Squad. We saw what just happened to the Many Saints of Newark. I mean, so we saw that. Dune is unfortunately going to have to deal with that unfortunate fate as well. But even though Dune is opening on HBO Max on the same day, do you think this momentum could benefit it as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that, again, people, that when you have a great experience in the movie theater, you want to continue to have a great experience. And I think what's really interesting is, between Free Guy, which was an original IP, Shang-Chi, which is part of the MCU, Venom MCU, this James Bond, and then Dune, which is of course a reinterpretation of Frank Herbert's novel. We're getting the big spectacles, but they're all sort of different. I mean, Venom is, even though it's a Marvel, in the Marvel family, it's very different than Shang-Chi, which is very different than Free Guy, which is different than Bond and certainly different than Dune. We also have Halloween Kills. You've got One Night in Soho coming out, Edgar Wright's new movie. And this month is just, I think, collectively, like our viewer pointed out, it's creating a momentum that is sort of bringing us all back to maybe our love affair with movies, which I think is great. And the theater, specifically the theatrical experience of movies.
All right, question is for you guys. What do you think about these projections we're seeing? Bond right now is being projected. It may hit it, it may not. But right now the projections are saying Bond is going to hit $100 million, which would represent the biggest opening since Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, the biggest October opening in the history of cinema, and the biggest opening for any Bond film in history. How significant do you think that is? Whatever you guys think, jump down into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts.